Alright, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of a reading of Fan the Flames, Revolutionary Position on the Chicano National Question by the August 29 movement Marxist-Leninist. So, it came to my attention that there's been audio issues in the last two recordings at some sections. I think I narrowed it down. I think I accidentally recorded using my webcam instead of my microphone. And I did what I can to kind of salvage the audio, kind of make it more tolerable, more bearable. But yeah, as for now, I don't have time to re-record it, so unfortunately it is what it is. My apologies to everybody. Well, getting back to the subject of the text, this is the third and final part, and in this part they'll be talking about the contemporary Chicano national movement, which of course this was written in 1974, I believe. So, back when it was strong. So, yeah, a good way that ATM is tying this all together. In the first part, they kind of outlined themselves as an organization, how they came to form, kind of gave somewhat of a glance into their positions. And then they talked about the history of the Chicano nation, how it came to be, and now they're tying it all back together by talking about the contemporary movement. They bring up organizations such as the Brown Berets, the Raza Unida Party, and other Mecha también, and other organizations like that, which I think have somewhat had their namesake brought up before in the text, but this gets into a lot of detail. It's going to be a very good read. And without further ado, I'll stop stalling from it, and we'll get you all in. Fan the Flames, a revolutionary position on the Chicano national question by the August 29th movement Marxist-Leninist. Page 50. The rise of the contemporary Chicano national movement. During World War II, Chicanos migrated from the Southwest to industrial centers in the Midwest and California. They entered the military and fought in the Imperialist War, encountering great racism in the ranks of the army. In the barrios, Chicanos were subject to the most barbarous oppression and discrimination. In some cities of Texas and Colorado, they could not enter public pools or movie theaters except once a week, on quote-unquote Mexican Day. In Los Angeles, sailors attacked Chicano youth in the Susu riots and were egged on by the press. When a young Chicano was killed in Los Angeles in 1942, the press fanned suspicions of gang warfare among Chicano youth from different barrios, and 17 Chicanos were paraded before the court and then marched off to prison. This famous quote-unquote Sleepy Lagoon case, as it was called, was nothing more than a racist attack on the Chicano people, and it was seen as that all over the world. A committee, the Sleepy Lagoon Defense Committee, was formed to defend the accused and receive support from Chicanos in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and even the battlefields in the Philippines and Guam. After the war, barrio defense committees were formed all over the Southwest to defend Chicanos against attacks by the police in their communities and to provide legal defense for Chicano youth charged with assault on police officers when they tried to defend themselves against these terrorist attacks. When the troops came home after the war, Chicano veterans, sickened by contradiction of fighting for democracy abroad when there was national oppression at home, began to take up the fight against discrimination against Chicanos. Organizations like the American GI Forum, a Chicano veterans organization, the Mexican American Political Association, MAPA, and the Unity Leagues and Community Service Organizations, CSO, in California, formed in the late 1940s and 1950s. These groups fought for political representation of Chicanos in the Southwest, organized voter registration drives, fought to end gerrymandering of districts, which divided Chicano barrios politically so that no single voting district would Chicanos represent a majority, and backed candidates which supported their programs. In the early years between 1940 and 1965, The Chicano movement was led by reformists, particularly the petty bourgeoisie forces, which sought assimilation into the Anglo-American nation. Positively, these groups took up many struggles of Chicanos for democratic rights, but the struggle for reforms and for democracy was never connected to the struggle against capitalism. The period of McCarthyism and the anti-communist hysteria of the 1950s brought many Chicano activists to wrap themselves in the American flag to protect themselves against persecution. So, for example, the Chicano Vets groups called itself the American GI Forum. Abandoning most of its illegal apparatus, such as cells of the party in the factories and mass organizations, the CPUSA took up the, quote, peaceful path to socialism, end quote, of legislative reforms and petitions. The quote-unquote peaceful road was nothing less than class collaboration and represented the real effort of the agents of the bourgeoisie to steer the working class and national movements away from the revolution and to ensure that they would remain slaves of the imperialists. The actions of the CPUSA followed step by step the seizure of power in the Soviet Union by revisionists that have dismantled the worker state and restored capitalism there. As the restoration of capitalism took place in the USSR and state monopoly capitalism developed in the Soviet Union, the CPUSA increasingly stripped itself of all ties with Marxism-Leninism, firmly consolidating as a revisionist party by 1960. Despite these setbacks, revolution proved to be the main trend in the US and the world. The mid-1960s saw the rise of revolutionary movements all over the world. The liberation forces in China, led by Mao Zedong, had thrown out the puppets of the imperialists and began the road to socialist reconstruction. In the 1950s, Korea, Indochina, Cuba, and much of the African continent had risen up against imperialism and colonialism. By 1960, the US was taking steps to march into Indochina, and by the mid-1960s, US troops were actively suppressing the just struggle of the Vietnamese people for their national liberation. In China, the great proletarian cultural revolution was waging, led by Mao Zedong, against the forces in the party that would have held back the revolution and steered it down the road of capitalist restoration. In the US, the struggle of the Afro-American nation was boiling. Black students in the heart of the Afro-American nation began the sit-in movement to take up the fight against racist segregation and the most vile forms of oppression. Students, black and white from the North, came in busloads to the South to join the struggle and lend their material assistance to the struggle against the armed rule of the imperialists in the South through the present-day descendants of the old slave masters and plantation owners. As the war intensified and billions of dollars were poured into the imperialists' futile attempts to save their puppet regimes in South Vietnam, the oppression and exploitation of the working class, especially the oppressed nationalities, increased and their resistance burned in fires of rebellion in every major urban center of the country, as well as in the Black Belt South. From the national movements and anti-war movement came groups such as the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords Party, Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, Iwood Kuen, the Brown Berets, and many other organizations. In the Southwest, the growing revolutionary upheaval worldwide shook loose the national movement from the hands of the comprador bourgeoisie and class collaborationist petty bourgeoisie. The revolutionary peasantry, intelligentsia, petty bourgeoisie, and most importantly, the proletariat, began to steer the direction of the national movement away from reformism and towards revolution. Student groups like UMAS, United Mexican American Students, and Mayo, Mexican American Youth Organization, and later MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, grew up on the campuses to fight for increased Chicano enrollment and for programs that would be geared to serving the Chicano communities. In New Mexico, the campesinos, Chicano peasantry, once again took up the struggle for land, and their armed revolts were suppressed only with the use of tanks, helicopters, and several divisions of the National Guard with automatic weapons. The Alianza Federal de Mercedes, based in northern New Mexico and led by Reyes Lopez Tijerina, pulled together Chicano peasants in growing numbers, reaching a membership of 60,000 at its peak. The Alianza issued proclamations in New Mexico declaring that the, quote, USA has not title for New Mexico, end quote, and that, quote, all Spanish and Indian pueblos are free forever, end quote. The Alianza movement flew in the face of the reformist and revisionist CPUSA, who were telling Chicano peasants to put their faith in the good judgments of the imperialists, who would certainly compensate them for the loss of their lands, or telling them to rely on liberal Democrats that would oppose the monopoly policies of the imperialist-owned corporations that own the mines, lumbering areas, water rights, and land of the Southwest. Willing to retake the land by armed struggle if necessary, the campesinos of New Mexico and their struggle shines as a powerful example to the entire Chicano nation, and for that reason, it had to be stopped. Using all the powers of the state apparatus, the FBI, courts, legislature, etc., they attacked the Alianza and jailed its leadership. But as present struggles in New Mexico have shown, they would not be able to stop the revolutionary character of that movement or stop the aspirations of the oppressed masses for liberation. Groups like the Brown Berets and Black Berets also began to form in the Chicano nation and in urban centers outside of it. Chicano youth, influenced by the revolution in Cuba and by the growth of such forces as the Black Panther Party, formed these groups to patrol the barrios, to protect Chicano communities from attacks by police, and to put a stop between fights of Chicano youth from rival barrios. Most significant of these organizations was the Black Berets of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that published a 12-point program which called for, quote, self-determination and liberation for all Chicanos in the USA, end quote, point 1, and, quote, community control of our institutions and land, end quote, point 3. Forces like the Berets supported the struggle of the campesinos and took up opposition to the imperialist war, demanding, quote, USA out of Vietnam, Latin America, and Aztlan, end quote, point 6. In their program, the Black Berets was one of the first contemporary Chicano groups to raise as a principle the struggle against capitalism and to uphold armed self-defense and armed struggle, quote, as the only means of liberation, end quote, points 11 and 12. In Denver, the Crusade for Justice led by Corky Gonzalez played a leading role in bringing together activists from all over the Southwest to discuss the direction for the Chicano national movement. Organized first to take up the struggle for democratic rights of Chicanos in Denver, the Crusade quickly found that even these struggles would be suppressed by the imperialists and their police thugs, who several times attacked the Crusade members and ransacked the offices. In the early 1970s, it hosted a series of youth conferences in which students and youth from all over the country came to discuss the struggle for Chicano liberation. Out of these conferences came cohesion of the national movement and its consciousness of itself as a revolutionary movement of struggling for national liberation. For the first time, people all over the Southwest began calling themselves Chicano and connecting to an oppressed nation. In the Plan de Aztlan, which came out of the first National Chicano Youth Liberation Conference in March 1969, Chicanos declared themselves a nation struggling to be, quote, autonomous and free, end quote. Out of these first conferences came a commitment to break with the two-party system and to form an independent political party, El Partido de la Raza Unida. The Raza Unida party caught on like a wildfire throughout all of the Southwest. In South Texas, Jose Angel Gutierrez led students from Mayo in building the partido there. In the overwhelmingly Chicano, quote, Winter Garden, end quote, area of Texas, the partido won many electoral victories, and soon Chicanos were organizing chapters in Denver, Albuquerque, Chicago, Los Angeles, Oakland, and many other major cities in and out of the Southwest. The struggle for leadership of La Raza Unida party gave rise to the great struggle within the organization to determine the path of the party and the whole Chicano movement would take. Two lines emerged in that struggle. On the one hand stood the reformists, many of them poverty pimps, who wanted to make the Partido an electoral party and place all emphasis on wheeling and dealing with the Democrats and Republicans and on electing Chicanos to office. On the other hand stood the Marxist-Leninists and revolutionary nationalists, who sought to make the party a fighting organization that would stand up to every form of oppression and prepare the masses for armed struggle to overthrow the rule of the imperialists. The progressive forces of LRUP sought to base the Partido in the proletariat and to support and organize the struggle of the proletariat. Many Chicanos, especially in California, began their political activity through the support of the United Farm Workers, correctly seeing the struggle of the farm workers as a national movement. What was not then realized was that the farm workers of California, Arizona, and South Texas represented a rural proletariat, and that their struggle was also part of the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Under the leadership of such forces such as the Labor Committee of the LRUP in Los Angeles, the leading role of the proletariat was now opened in disgust and recognized by the progressive sectors of the Partido. Labor committees and collectives were formed in California and in the heart of the Chicano nation, New Mexico. These forces actively took up the struggle of Chicano workers in the factories and fields and in their areas. One struggle which the Marxist-Leninists and the LRUP took up and popularized in and out of the Southwest was the FARA strike. In El Paso and later in New Mexico, thousands of workers walked off and began a struggle for a union recognition that lasted 2 years. Mostly Chicano women, the strike was significant not only because it was a struggle to unionize the Chicano nation, where so-called, quote, right-to-work laws, end quote, and the brutality of Texas and Arizona Rangers have been used to crush union drives, but also because it meant that throughout the country, especially outside of the Chicano nation, that workers and students of all nationalities joined in support for the strike. For its part, LRUP, through the Labor Committee, formed support committees to agitate about the strike, to raise the oppression of the Chicano people, and the significance of the struggle against the national oppression. The Chauvinist Revolutionary Union, now the RCP, or Revolutionary Communist Party, also set up such committees but diluted the agitation by refusing to expose imperialism as an enemy, refusing to raise the right of self-determination, even though at that time they recognized the existence, quote-unquote, of a Chicano nation, and refusing to link the FARA strike to the struggle for liberation of the oppressed nation and to the proletarian revolution. The FARA strike was also significant because it exposed the role of U.S. imperialism in Mexico and the oppression of the border region. After the revolution of 1910 in Mexico, many of the major corporations owned by the U.S. and Mexico were nationalized, such as holdings of Standard Oil, which became Pemex, the Mexican National Petroleum Corporation. But U.S. imperialism continued to restrict the development of the Mexican economy and to control major sectors of its use of prestanombres, corporations owned by the U.S. but operated by Mexican nationals under Mexican incorporation laws. So U.S. imperialism continues to hold sway in automobile production, electrical energy, finance, etc. U.S. imperialism also has purchased huge stretches of land, such as Anderson, Clayton, and Co., on which crops are grown and harvested using large-scale production techniques for export to the U.S. Increasing proletarianization of the Mexican peasantry has meant huge immigration to the U.S., which during times of boom have been encouraged only to be stopped, and in fact for wholesale deportations to take place during times of economic crisis and recession. During the 1930s, between 550,000 and 750,000 Mexicans and many Chicanos were deported, and in the first 5 years of 1970, during the post-Vietnamese recession, 4 million have been deported. The imperialists have used the Mexican people as an important sector of the reserve army of labor which all capitalists need. The importation of Mexican labor has driven down wages in the Southwest, been used to stop our unionization drives, and to help them out during times of labor shortage, especially during imperialist war, when much of the working class is dying off for the profits and expansion of the power of the imperialists. The imperialists formalized the importation of Mexicans under the Bracero program. When that came to an end in the mid-1960s, the border industrial program began. Under the BIP, U.S. corporations have set up about 400 assembly plants within 12 miles of the border where they can take advantage of the low cost of labor, about $4 a day, and reap huge super profits over and above what they could make if the same goods were produced by Anglo-American workers. During the Fara strike, capitalist owner Willie Fara threatened to close down his plant and run away to Mexico or some part of the world if the union drive succeeded. He attempted to import Mexican workers and hire undocumented workers, so-called illegal aliens, but the consciousness of the workers in Mexico was such that many Mexican workers refused to scab on their Chicano sisters and brothers. Mexican workers, mostly women, in the paint factory in Mexico that was also on strike even sent a statement of solidarity to strikers in El Paso. Just as the oppression of the Vietnamese people and the U.S. aggression in Vietnam by U.S. imperialism brought thousands upon thousands of students and workers to take to the streets in opposition to the war, such as the great anti-imperialist demonstration of the National Chicano Moratorium of August 29, 1970 in East Los Angeles, what the organization is named after, just an insight. The Chicano people have rallied to the side of the Mexican people to oppose deportations. National moratoriums have been organized against deportations, and thousands have marched against brutal oppression of the inmigrantes sin papeles, undocumented immigrant workers. The demonstrations against the war, against deportations, against police brutality have been heroic stands by the Chicano people against imperialism, but these spontaneous struggles alone cannot bring an end to the exploitation of the Chicano people and the oppression of the working class masses. The lack of a genuine communist party during the upheavals and rebellions of the 1960s meant that the revolutionary potential of the Chicano national movement was not realized. The powerful anti-imperialist struggle of the Chicano nation for liberation was not joined with the struggle of the multinational working class for the overthrow of the rule of the imperialists and the establishment of socialism. Rather than being guided by the only science of the working class and oppressed masses, Marxism-Leninism, the Chicano national movement of the late 60s and early 70s was guided by bourgeois ideology of cultural nationalism. While raising the call for self-determination, many of the leaders of the Chicano movement gutted its revolutionary essence by interpreting it to mean the community control. The Chicano petty bourgeoisie and intellectuals led the national movement toward partial reforms rather than resolution. They restricted the struggle solely to fight for more Chicano professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, even small businesses, and general fought for their own class interests rather than for the interests of the masses of working people. Just as the reformists of Lenin's day and the Second International called for cultural autonomy, i.e., control of cultural and educational institutions, the nationalists fought for Chicano schools, hospitals, media, and businesses, even for Chicano police, while leaving intact the real class relations under capitalism. For Chicano workers, it does not matter whether the capitalist that exploits them is Chicano, Afro-American, or white. The class relationships between capitalist and worker remain the same, and the only path to end that exploitation remains the same: the overthrow of the wage slavery system. Although revolution was always talked about, in fact, reformism was the path actively taken by many nationalists. While stating, quote, "Nationalism is the key to organization and transcends all religions, political, class, and economic factions or boundaries," and quote, "El Plan de Aztlán." The nationalists made deals with the imperialists, such as the Texas LRUP, battering with the Nixon backers to exchange votes for Nixon for a medical clinic, and drove wedges between the Chicano and Anglo-American worker. Chicanos were told that gringo was the enemy and could not be trusted, and that the only form of organization must be national. The proletariat, however, has not been fooled by such schemes. While the reformist nationalists have been exposed to the Chicano masses through the process of their treachery, many reformists have now taken up the disguise of Marxism to hide their real nationalist and reformist leanings. Groups like CASA, for example, attempt to hold back the desires of the advance for a genuine communist party made of all nationalities that can lead the struggle of the working class and oppressed nationalities to a victorious proletarian revolution. Instead, they tell the working class that they are not ready for a multinational organization. This despite the fact that the Chicano proletariat has been the leading force historically in the Southwest in forming multinational organizations, especially trade unions. The modern-day nationalists of CASA tell Chicanos that what they need is a Mexican party. Under CASA's distorted view of the world, Chicanos don't exist and the Chicano movement is a CIA front. These nationalists are being rejected by the most class-conscious revolutionaries who do desire a socialist revolution and to realize that it can only be accomplished under the leadership of a multinational communist party. The narrow nationalists saw that culture was playing an important role in the national movement and sought to maintain and develop Chicano culture. However, their class stand made it impossible for them to distinguish between revolutionary and reactionary aspects of Chicano culture. Instead, all were embraced. The reactionary male supremacist notion of machismo, for example, was held up as an ideal for the Chicano movement. Women were objectively held back in the Chicano organizations from leadership, despite the fact that they formed the backbone of many Chicano groups, particularly on the campuses. Chicanas courageously stood up to this male supremacy in the Chicano national movement and demanded that their role of women in the movement be transformed into a revolutionary one. Groups like Las Hijas de Cuauhtémoc, La Comisión Femenil Mexicana were organized to take up in the struggle against oppression of the Chicanas. Conferences were organized in statewide and region-wide groups formed to lead that struggle. In the absence of a revolutionary position on the women's question, many Chicanas began to see men as the enemy, particularly petty bourgeois feminists, began to demand more Chicana bureaucrats, government officials, even capitalists. However, the struggle of the working class women, such as the FARA strike, helped many working class Chicanas to see their triple oppression, as women, as members of an oppressed nation, and as members of the working class, that could only be won through socialist revolution. The tremendous and powerful struggles of the late 1960s and early 1970s began to wane by 1972, peaking with the anti-war march and rally of the August 29, 1970. But the oppression of the Chicano nation and the Chicano national minority living outside of the nation continues to give rise to resistance, and the struggle has once again picked up. Throughout the Southwest and in barrios of California and Chicago, the struggle against police terrorism has developed stride by stride, with the attempts of the imperialists to shift the present economic crisis on the backs of the working class and to intensify the oppression of the oppressed nationalities and women. The growing danger of the war between the two superpowers and the fascism at home has meant that the imperialists have unleashed their own armed thugs, the police, to terrorize the working class and oppressed nationality communities and to ensure the continued oppression and exploitation of the Chicano nation and the Afro-American nation. This oppression has meant the rise of such groups such as the Danny Treviño Committee to Stop Police Brutality in San Jose, the Coalition Against Police Crimes in Oakland, the Coalition Against Police Abuse in Los Angeles, to oppose police terrorism and take up the fight to defend the Chicano working class communities against these attacks. In the Southwest, in the heart of the Chicano nation, We've seen the formation of groups like La Federación, which are once again leading the struggle for land on a revolutionary path. We've seen the upsurge of revolutionary forces in the Southwest, such as the historic Alamosa Conference of January 1976, which took up the revolutionary demands of, quote, government unity of the Southwest, end quote, and the quote, confiscation of land and natural resources owned by the bourgeoisie of the oppressor nation, end quote. We are witnessing, too, the growth of the revolutionary student movement, such as the Fuerzas Revolucionarias de Aztlán, which is taking an active role in supporting the struggles of the peasantry and proletariat. And we've seen, too, the rise of the proletarian struggle in the Southwest and the growing revolutionary sentiments of the proletariat of the Chicano nation. In this period, we've seen the rise of the Chicano culture in the Southwest that places emphasis on the democratic and progressive features of culture and which reflects the revolutionary aspirations of the masses. Corridos have been written by such composers such as Romel Fuentes, glorifying the accomplishments of the UFW, of La Raza Unida Party, and of La Alianza. Some of the best known of these corridos are, quote, Yo Soy Chicano, Corrido de Aztlán, Corrido Chicano, and La Bamba Chicana, end quote, which tell the story of the Chicano and Mexican people and which call for the liberation of the Chicano nation, Aztlán, quote unquote. Many revolutionary poems have been written by Chicano activists such as, quote unquote, Yo Soy Joaquín by Corky González, and Chicano teatro groups such as the early Teatro Campesino, Teatro de la Gente, and Teatro del Barrio de Chicago have written and performed actos, skits, which describe the struggle of the Chicano people. Chicano artists have painted murals and posters which tell the history of the Chicano people. Chicano artists such as Malicas and Juan Fuentes have made many posters for the Chicano movement and have shown the anti-imperialist character of the Chicano national movement. Posters like the one by Maquis, which call for unity between the Vietnamese and Chicano people. Even the term Chicano, quote unquote, itself came to be used throughout the Southwest really for the first time in this period. The use of one name to describe the people and the use of Aztlán, quote unquote, to describe the Chicano nation played an important role in influencing the common psychological makeup of the people at this time for them to consciously see themselves as an oppressed nation struggling for its liberation. Led by Chicanas, the struggle against machismo has also influenced the Chicano nation. Led by Chicanas, the struggle against machismo has also influenced the Chicano national movement. Sorry about that, that's typed twice. And has made the revolutionary bond between men and women within the ranks of the national movement much stronger. By no means is the struggle against male supremacy ended. It has only just begun. But the process is strengthening the ranks of the national movement to permit Chicanas to take their place as active participants and leaders of the struggle for the liberation and socialism. The territory of the Chicano nation. The earliest settlements of Spanish were in the Rio Grande Valley. Only sparse settlements were made in California, along the coast, and in South Texas. By the time of the war in 1846, when the Southwest was taken by the United States, 80% of the Hispanic population lived in what was then the territory of New Mexico. It was in this territory that historically the population has lived in a compact mass and has made up a majority of the area. In northern and eastern Texas, the majority of the population, after 1821, was always Anglo-American. While in California, the Mexican population represented about 75% of the population in 1846, and were less than 5 years later it was only 13%. Throughout the region, Chicanos have formed a stable community that continues to have close ties to the land. Despite immigration from Mexico and of the Anglo-Americans into the Southwest, the Chicano people living in the territory can often trace back their generations, living in the same general vicinity for more than 5 generations. This is especially true in northern New Mexico and Colorado in the San Luis Valley. Migration from Mexico has been concentrated in California and Texas. In New Mexico, only the southeastern and south central mining areas have attracted large numbers of Mexican immigrants. In both Colorado and New Mexico, over 80% of the Chicano population in the census reports of the last 3 decades were natives of the state, born to parents who were natives to the state. Only about 4% of the population of these two states was born in Mexico, and in Texas it was about 1 out of 6 in 1960. Gerber, page 107. While imperialism has developed large irrigation and agricultural lands in some parts of New Mexico and Colorado, it has been at the expense of the campesinos in those states and has meant that many campesinos have been forced to migrate from their rural homes to urban centers of production. Between 1950 and 1960, for example, the rural Chicano population in the Southwest was as a whole declined only slightly, but in New Mexico it fell by 23%, and in Colorado by 17%. Not only has the migration been from the rural areas to the cities, it has also been to industrial centers outside the Chicano nation, particularly on the West Coast, California, and the Midwest, especially Chicago. This migration out of the Southwest, as well as the influx of Anglo-Americans, has increased. This does not mean that the Chicano nation ceases to exist. Just as migration from Mexico, Puerto Rico, or the Afro-American nation does not destroy those nations. Nor does the increase of the size of the Chicano nation, unlike the line of CASA or PSP, which attempts to convince us that wherever Mexicans and Puerto Ricans migrate, the Mexican nation or Puerto Rican nation exists. The Southwest has large areas which are only sparsely populated. For example, in Arizona and New Mexico, particularly the northern parts, it is in many of these areas that the Chicano peasantry continue to exist and to attempt to eke out a living from land farmed by their ancestors for many generations. In 1960, there were only 4 counties in the entire Southwest, with close to more than 100,000 Chicanos living there. This excludes Los Angeles County, which is outside of the Chicano nation. These are El Paso, Bexar County with San Antonio, Cameron County with Brownsville, and Hidalgo County. See attached map, which will be illustrated in the video. In 1970, the Chicano population in the entire southwest part of Texas was over 50%, in every county but 3. In New Mexico, from Doña Ana County northward to Archuleta, Conejos, Costilla, and Huérfano counties of Colorado, and westward to Greenlee County in the eastern section of Arizona, the same is true. Bordering these counties where the majority population is Chicano and which presented more or less a continuous area are many more counties with the populations of about 20% to 50%. In this area alone, the population is 1.7 million and over 60% Chicano. Several urban centers lie on the edge of the core region of the Chicano nation, such as Tucson County and Pima County, Denver, and Pueblo, Colorado, San Antonio, and Corpus Christi. Each plays an important role in the region of the area and has strong ties to the rural areas of the region. This general description of the territory of the Chicano nation makes no attempt to specify its borders or to limit the territory only to those areas of the majority population. The Southwest was taken at force of arms, and it will be force of the toiling masses of the Chicano nation that will determine the exact area in which the call for self-determination would be exercised. Economic life of the Chicano nation. Having ripped the Southwest out of the hands of Mexico, the U.S. capitalist class quickly set out to develop it, and in the era of imperialism built their great railroad, more than 50 employees, and more than 15 employed, more than 100. Minority-owned businesses, pages 148 to 150. In contract construction, there were just under 400 firms with gross receipts of more than 100,000, 8 of which earned more than $1 million. In manufacturing, over 200 firms with gross receipts of over 100,000, and 12 had more than 1 million. I bid, page 156. In finance, there were 85 with over 100,000 and 4 with more than 1 million in gross receipts. Throughout the Chicano nation, there are about 30,000 Chicano-owned firms, with another 23,000 in California. Gross revenues, excluding California, total just under 900 million. Total just under 900 million. I bid, page 72 and 73. As is quickly apparent, the holdings of the Chicano petty bourgeoisie and bourgeois form only a drop in the bucket to the billions of dollars extracted from the mines and oil fields of the Southwest and the huge super profits taken up by the imperialists by their exploitation of the Chicano working class. The Chicano peasantry lives mostly in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, but there are also many small farmers in the South Texas area. The land is poorly irrigated and only sparsely populated in these areas. In Tierra Amarilla, a mountain village in northern New Mexico, for example, there are only about 300 residents, but it has been the center of the struggle of the peasantry as shown by the Alianza in 1967 and La Federación right now. Costilla County of Colorado, particularly the San Luis Valley, has also become a center of struggle over land. There, the Asociación has taken up the struggle against the Taylor Ranch, which lays claim to over 77,500 acres of communal lands, and absentee landlords, such as the Arizona Land and Cattle Company, which also owns the Alamosa National Bank in Baca Grande. The land struggle between the peasantry and the imperialists is also intensifying in the General Mineral Belt, which stretches from Albuquerque to Gallup. In this area, which belongs to the Native Americans, over 50% of the uranium supply of the U.S. is located and the region is being torn up by Gulf, Exxon, Conoco, and Anaconda. In small towns such as Marquez, grazing lands and farmlands which are slowly being eroded and the entire area is being surrounded by mining construction. Recently, tests conducted by the Environmental Protection Agency have found dangerous levels of radioactivity in the area's water supply, levels which make the water unfit for livestock or irrigation. The Guardian, March 31st, 1976, page 2. Through the state and federal government, millions of acres of land in the Southwest have been transferred to the imperialists. National forests, while closed for use to the Chicano peasantry, are handed over to the timber industry or mining industry. The Bureau of Indian Affairs also works hand in hand with the imperialists to make certain they reap huge super profits from the exploitation of the native peoples in the region. On the gigantic Navajo reservation, which overlaps the borders of 4 states, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, is a case in point. While only 1 in 3 Navajo homes have electrical lighting and only 1 in 5 have running water, the imperialists have built several coal gasification plants. Each is 100 times larger than the average gasification facility, to burn Navajo coal and pollute Navajo water while carrying electricity to Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, and Los Angeles. Alquesani notes, early spring, 1976, pages 22 and 23. As with the Chicano people, the construction of mines and utilities on native lands has intensified the struggle of the native peoples. While a small strata of native people have become wealthy off the gasification plants, the average income of the Navajo people is $900 a year. The mines and factories built on the native lands to take advantage of the high unemployment of the area has meant the rise of proletarians among the native people and has connected the struggle for land of the native people in the Southwest with the proletarian movements. Witness the recent takeover of a Fairchild plant on a reservation land by Native American revolutionaries during a strike. The tremendous oppression of the Chicano people in the Southwest means that in many sections of New Mexico, particularly in Mora County, which is 94.6% Chicano, over half of the families in the area live at or below the poverty level. Counties such as Rio Arriba, Taos, San Miguel, and Mora have unemployment rates triple the national average. Similar conditions exist in South Texas, where Chicanos represent more than 60% of the population. Throughout the core of the region of the Chicano nation, the average family income in 1970 was less than $3,000. In Brownsville, for example, the annual income in 1975 was $2,413. In McAllen, it was $2,574. In Laredo, it was $2,488. In Hidalgo County, 75% Chicano, it was less than $3,000, with a per capita annual income of only $6,625. LA Times, June 9th, 1975. The imperialists have used the Rangers, the Texas Rangers, the National Guard, police dogs, and riot squads, mace and bullets, injections, and anti-worker right-to-work laws throughout the Chicano nation to break strikes and cripple the trade union movement. Even so, they have not been able to defeat the proletarian movement there. As the FARA strike taught workers throughout the Southwest, the struggle to unionize the Southwest is on the rise. Workers in ports and oil fields of South Texas, in the mines of New Mexico and Arizona, and the large farms of agribusiness, as well as the garment and the electronics industry along the border, have intensified union struggles. Outside of the Chicano nation, the Chicano national minority is highly urbanized. In the 1950s, throughout the country as a whole, 60% of the Chicano people lived in urban areas. By 1960, the ratio was 7 out of 10. Today, it is about 3 out of 4. Highly proletarianized, the Chicano people living in and out of the Southwest are found in the basic industries: steel, auto production, petrochemical, mining, etc. Chicanos make up 32% of all steel workers in the 11 western states and account for 1/3 of the membership of District 6 of the UAW, Arizona, Utah, and California. In addition, Chicanos work in the meatpacking, transportation, warehouse, and longshore, construction, garment, electronics, and aerospace industry. Chicanas too are highly proletarianized. Of the almost 2 million Chicanas, 16 or over in the 5 southwestern states, 40% are in the labor force. 1 out of every 4 Chicanas, Chicano women, works as an operative or transportation worker. About the same number of work as clerical workers, and 1 out of 5 works as a service worker. In urban areas in the Southwest, Chicanas are concentrated in the canneries and garment and textile industries. Arroyo, page 20, page 24. Nieto Gomez, page 357. Within the Chicano nation, the imperialist monopoly and the land and natural resources, and intense oppression and continual resistance of the peasantry has made the land question a burning one in the region. The Chicano bourgeoisie and petty bourgeois have shown their incapacity to lead the national movement. They have either openly sided with the imperialists in the oppression and exploitation of the Chicano people, or they have capitulated to that oppression in the hopes of themselves escaping its brutalities. Only the Chicano peasantry and the proletariat will deal resolutely with the land question in the Southwest. It is the task of communists to lead the struggle for land in the Southwest against the imperialists and provide a revolutionary solution to the land question. The new Communist Party will ultimately lead the struggle to the successful overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, laying the real basis for solving, quote-unquote, the national question. Language of the Chicano people. Since the Spanish colonized the Southwest, the Spanish language has become the dominant language of the region. Even many natives were forced to learn Spanish by the missionaries and to adopt Spanish surnames. To this day, many Navajos, Sunnis, and Pueblos have Spanish surnames, and some are trilingual, speaking their native tongue, some Spanish and English. Spanish reached dominance in the area with growth of trade between Taos and Chihuahua, and its importance as the language of commerce. By the 1830s, the use of the English language was becoming more common in the area as a small group of merchants and traders came to New Mexico and Colorado, and as English began to rise as the language of commerce. Still, however, Spanish remained the dominant language. After the War of 1846 and the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, the use of English increased significantly in the Southwest, mostly because of the increased influx of Anglo-American settlers. With the establishment of the Bureau of Indian Affairs near the end of the last century, English, rather than Spanish, became the language of instruction on all native reservations. Of all the areas of the Southwest, New Mexico retained its use of Spanish and completely in the period of imperialist expansion into the Southwest. By the 1876, the first public schools were established in the state. Soon there were 133, of which 111 were conducted in Spanish, 12 in both Spanish and English, and only 10 in English. By contrast, in Texas, Spanish language instruction was practically non-existent, except for the ricos who set up their own schools or sent their children to be educated in parochial schools in Mexico. For the masses of Tejanos, English only, quote-unquote, was the rule, and children were often beaten or expelled from school when they spoke Spanish. Because of the nature of the Chicano population in New Mexico, firmly rooted to the soil, Spanish predominated among the population, while both English and Spanish were used within the state government. It was not until 1915 that the first English-only trial was held in the state. In the 1930s, at the same time, the Chicano petty bourgeoisie, through LULAC, was organizing American citizens groups and requiring the use of the English language in their meetings. Senator Chavez of New Mexico pushed for English-only education in public schools. This has meant, too, a slow but still apparent decline in the Spanish-language newspapers and printed materials in the area. Because of the increased Anglo-American population in the Southwest, and because of the enforced use of English by Chicanos, English is now the dominant language of the region. However, it is not the dominant language within the Chicano population of the region. Spanish continues to be the language of the people of the Chicano nation. In fact, the Spanish language has actually increased in the Southwest since the 1930s. In northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, for example, 80% of the Chicano population is Spanish-speaking, and in the 1970 census, 69% of the Chicano population in the region listed Spanish as their mother tongue. In Texas and Arizona, 91% of the Chicano population reported their native language as Spanish. In the core of the Chicano nation, Spanish is the dominant language of 85% of the Chicano population. The imperialists have tried hard to wipe out the use of Spanish among the Chicano people. In Texas, which is more influenced by Mexican immigration than New Mexico, Spanish is prohibited on school grounds. This rule applies not only to students, but also to teachers, delivery men, custodians, cafeteria workers, etc., who in South Texas are usually Chicano. As recently as in 1970, a Chicano teacher in Crystal City, Texas, was indicted for conducting a high school history class in Spanish. Despite the fact that the case was later dismissed, a law prohibiting the use of Spanish still remained in effect. The excluded student, page 15. In many sections of the Southwest, the majority of children entering public school speak little to no English. In 1967, in 7 counties of South Texas, for example, 70% of the Chicano population could only speak Spanish when they began school. More, page 122. This fact, coupled with the brutal oppression of Chicanos and the suppression of the Spanish language, has made the struggle to use Spanish in the schools an important one in the Southwest and outside of it. Thousands of students have walked out all over the nation demanding bilingual, bicultural education, demanding the right to use Spanish as their own language in the schools and to be educated in that language. The petty bourgeoisie have attempted to divert the struggle for the democratic right to use Spanish on an equal footing with English solely to the struggle for bilingual education. and equated that struggle with the struggle for more Spanish-speaking teachers, lawyers, doctors, etc. As for bilingual education, the imperialists make use of it solely for the purpose of phasing out Spanish and replacing it with English, rather than placing both on an equal status. Thus, Chicano children can learn subjects in Spanish the first year and then slowly learn English until their fifth year, when they are expected to be operating in an English-only environment. While the petty bourgeoisie are concentrating on small reforms, the revolutionary elements of the petty bourgeoisie and intellectuals have connected the struggle for the right to use the Spanish language to the struggle for the right to self-determination. Groups like the Crusade for Justice have put forward that Spanish is the language of the Chicano nation, and Chicanos have the right to use it and practice it. But even here, many of these groups have set up only Chicano schools and have concentrated on establishing control of institutions rather than focusing in on the real solution to the oppression of the Chicano people and the suppression of the Chicano language: the question of overthrowing the power of capital. It is the task of communists to connect the struggle for democratic rights, such as equality of languages, to the basic demands of the national movement, and to connect the aims of the national movement with the aims of the whole proletarian movement, proletarian revolution. The psychological outlook of Chicano people. The outlook of the Chicano people has been conditioned by their history of oppression and resistance. The people itself is a blend, enforced, of the peoples and cultures indigenous to the area with those of Spanish. The culture of the people of the Southwest has changed with the changes in the mode of production of the region. The semi-feudal relations brought to the Southwest by the Spanish, particularly the patron-peon relationship, was accompanied by the ideology of that period, which preached docility and absolute authority of the patron, the clergy, and in the family of the father. Remnants of semi-feudal relations which continue in the Southwest, along with the influx of peones from Mexico during the years immediately after and during the Mexican Revolution, has meant some hangovers of the feudal culture persist in the culture of the Southwest, especially of machismo, which is being staunchly opposed by Chicanas active in the national movement. As capitalism rose in the Southwest, particularly in the era of imperialism, the culture of the Chicano people reflected a people suppressed and forcibly subjugated by foreign rule. The development of the corridos and muralista movement told the history of the Chicano people and of their struggle against the imperialists, especially against the vigilantes of the imperialists such as the Texas Rangers. With the appearance of the Chicano nation, the resistance and the common oppression throughout the nation gave rise to a common psychological outlook throughout the Southwest. People began seeing themselves as an oppressed nation and calling for self-determination, as seen in the various calls and plains since 1915 and planes. The contemporary Chicano movement has seen a further development of this common psychological outlook with the use of a common name to designate the people, Chicano, quote-unquote, and the development of a name to refer to the territory, Aztlán, quote-unquote. It has also seen the emergence of a distinct cultural flavor, with the rise of Chicano publications and media, Chicano theater groups, Chicano musicians, playwrights, artists, and poets, which for the most part focuses in on the oppression of the Chicanos in their artistic work. Rising with the national movement and the development of the Chicano culture has also been the influence of proletarian culture. The liberation struggles waged against imperialism, especially in Cuba, China, and Vietnam, have contributed many works of the art describing the victories which have influenced the art forms and styles of the Chicano artists. However, without the guidance of a revolutionary party to encourage this development, many revolutionary artists have degenerated into bourgeois art forms. It is the task of communists to encourage the development of the most democratic aspects of the Chicano culture and to lead the way in eliminating outlooks and practices which do not promote the full equality of women with men or the various nationalities. In addition, communists and revolutionaries must foster the development of revolutionary art and culture which will move forward the revolutionary struggle of the Chicano people and of all oppressed people. In conclusion, this is the oppression of the Chicano nation under imperialism. It suppressed their language, culture, and history. It denies the existence of the nation and attempts to obliterate them as a people. Imperialism subjects the Chicano people to super-exploitation in the sale of their labor power, and through forced sterilization of Chicanas, it even takes the lives of unborn children. These are the objective conditions of oppression of the Chicano nation. As the Chinese comrades teach us, quote, where there is oppression, there is resistance, end quote. It is from these objective conditions that the great revolutionary upsurge of the 1960s came. It did not fall from the sky as the imperialists would have us believe, or spring out of the heads of the worshippers of the Aztecas as the opportunists would tell us, but came as a direct result of the oppression and subjugation of the Chicano nation. The national struggle of the Chicano people is without a doubt a powerful anti-imperialist movement and is inseparably bound up with the proletarian struggle in the U.S. As communists, we must intensify our struggle to build a revolutionary communist party to lead the Chicano national movement and the movements of other oppressed nationalities, and to unite these struggles under the leadership of a multinational proletariat of the U.S. We have tried to show the historical development of a movement. We learned that the basis of the movement lies in the severe imperialist oppression of the Chicano nation in the Southwest. Imperialist rule is one. Imperialist rule is founded on 1. Their control of the land and natural resources of the Southwest. 2. The complete lack of democratic rights of the Chicano people in the Southwest, perpetrated by the division and gerrymandering of the areas of the Chicano majority. 3. The imperialist political and economic control of the Chicano nation. It is in order to smash that rule and overthrow these foundations of power that we put forward. Appendix A. Provisional Directorate of the Plan de San Diego, Texas. Plan de San Diego, Texas, State of Texas, January 6, 1915. We who in turn sign our names, assembled in the revolutionary plot of San Diego, Texas, solemnly promise each other on our work of honor that we will fulfill and cause to be fulfilled and complied with all the clauses, provisions stipulated in this document, and execute the orders and wishes emanating from the Provisional Directorate of this movement, and recognize as military chief of the same Mr. Agustin S. Garza, meeting with our lives the faithful accomplishment of what here is agreed upon. 1. On the 20th day of February 1915, at 2 o'clock in the morning, we will arise in arms against the government and country of the United States of North America, one as all and all as one, proclaiming the liberty of the individuals of the black race and its independence of Yankee tyranny, which has held us in iniquitous slavery since remote times. And at the same time, and in the same manner, we will proclaim the independence and segregation of the states bordering the Mexican nation, which are Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Upper California, of which states and the Republic of Mexico was robbed in the most perfidious manner and North American imperialism. 2. In order to render the foregoing clause effective, the necessary Army Corps will be formed under the immediate command of military leaders named by the Supreme Revolutionary Congress of San Diego, Texas, which shall have full power to designate a supreme chief, who shall be at the head of said army. The banner which will guide us in this enterprise shall be red, with a white diagonal fringe, and bearing the following inscription: Equality and Independence, quote unquote. And none of the subordinate leaders or subalterns shall use any other flag, except only the white flag for signals. The aforesaid army shall be known by the name of, quote, Liberating Army for Races and Peoples, end quote. 3. Each one of the chiefs shall do his utmost by whatever means possible to get possession of the arms and funds of the cities which he has beforehand designated to capture, in order that our cause may be provided with resources to continue to fight with proper success. The said leader, each being required to render account of everything to his superiors, in order the latter may dispose of it in the proper manner. 4. The leader who may take the city must immediately name and appoint municipal authorities in order that they may preserve, order, and assist in every possible way the revolutionary movement. In case the capital of any state which we are endeavoring to liberate be captured, there will be named in the same manner superior municipal authorities for the same purpose. 5. It is strictly forbidden to hold prisoners, either special prisoners, civilians, or soldiers, and the only time that should be spent in dealing with them is that which be absolutely necessary to demand funds, loans of them, and whether these demands be successful or not, they shall be shot immediately without any pretext. 6. Every stranger who shall be found armed and who cannot prove his right to carry arms shall be summarily executed, regardless of his race or nationality. 7. Every North American over 16 years of age shall be put to death, and only the aged men, the women, and the children shall be respected, and on no account shall the traitors to our race be spared or respected. 8. The Apaches of Arizona, as well as the Indians, Redskins of the territory, shall be given every guarantee, and their lands, which have been taken from them, shall be returned to them, to the end that they may assist us in the cause which we defend. 9. All appointments and grades in our army, which are exercised by subordinate officers, subalterns, shall be examined, recognized by the superior officers. There shall likewise be recognized the grades of leaders of other complots which may not be connected with this, and who may wish to cooperate with us, also who may affiliate with us later. 10. The movement having gathered force, and once having possessed ourselves of the states above alluded to, we shall proclaim them an independent republic, later requesting, if it thought to be expedient, annexation to Mexico, without concerning ourselves at the time about the form of government which may control the destinies of the common mother country. 11. When we shall have obtained independence for the Negroes, we shall grant them a banner, which they themselves be permitted to select, and we shall aid them in obtaining 6 states of the American Union, which states border upon those already mentioned, and they may be formed from these 6 states a republic that they may, therefore, be independent. 12. None of the leaders shall have power to make terms with the enemy without first communicating with the superior officers of the army, bearing in mind that this is a war without quarter, nor shall any leader enroll in his ranks any stranger, unless said stranger belong to the Latin, Negro, or Japanese race. 13. It is understood that of the members of this complot, or any who may come in later, shall, upon the definite triumph of the cause which we defend, fail to recognize their superiors, nor shall they aid others who, with bastard designs, may endeavor to destroy what has been accomplished by such great work. 14. As soon as possible, each local society, junta, shall nominate delegates who shall meet at a time and place before designated for the purpose of nominating a permanent directorate of the revolutionary movement. At this meeting shall be determined and worked out in detail the powers and duties of the permanent directorate, and the revolutionary plan may be revised or amended. 15. It is understood among those who may follow this movement that will carry us as a singing voice in the independence of the Negroes, placing obligations upon both races, and that on no account will we accept aid, either moral, pecuniary, from the government of Mexico, and it need not consider itself under any obligations in this, our movement. Equality and Independence, San Diego, Texas, January 6, 1915. President signed, L. Farragino, Agustin S. Garza, Commander, Manuel Flores, B. Ramos Jr., Secretary, A. Gonzalez, Lawyer, A. Saenez, Saloon Keeper, E. Cisneros, A. C. Almarez. Appendix B. San Antonio, la Convención Constitutiva por Derechos Mexicanos de Texas. A document of a former member of the CPUSA. On October 13, 1935, in San Antonio, la Convención Constitutiva por Derechos Mexicanos de Texas was convened. Delegates from labor unions, worker alliance branches, unemployed councils, and sociedades beneficiadas came together from all over Texas and the Southwest, mostly proletarian. It adopted resolutions on all subjects, including the land question, and adopted a resolution which called for the right to political secession in South Texas and the border region. Thus, we in the party recognized the similarity of the status of the Mexican people in Texas with that of the Negro people in the South and concluded that the remedy would be a similar one. We reached the conclusion that the struggles of the Mexican people in Texas must embrace the demand for a return of the land, for language and cultural rights, and for the right of political self-rule, even at the point of separation in the South Texas area where Mexican people constitute a large percentage or the majority of the population. These conclusions were elaborated into the form of a draft party resolution, and it was decided to implement it with action. A date for a conference was set to which were invited delegates from various organizations, sociedades beneficiadas, unemployed councils, and worker alliance branches and labor unions. This conference, known as the Convención Constitutiva por Derechos Mexicanos de Texas, met in a hall on the west side of San Antonio in an all-day session on October 13, 1935. With minor amendments, the conference voted approval of the draft resolution, and delegates were pledged to report, discuss, and popularize it to the organization membership and people in general. I regret not to be able to include with this a copy of the resolution, which many of our papers were lost or disposed during the repressive McCarthy years and FBI harassment. The early part of 1936 found us running the circuit like a reviewlist along the Rio Grande Valley, halting in the towns like McAllen, Fur, Weslaco, Mercedes, La Feria, Harlinger, San Benito, and down to the large center of Brownsville. And all these advanced workers who heard of activity in San Antonio organized meetings of workers, some places in the neighborhood or town plaza, and others in the mutualist halls. At these meetings, we brought the message of unity and organization. We reported of our experiences in San Antonio and Laredo, and that the favorable New Deal times made it possible even for agricultural and Mexican workers to organize and press for their demands. In the cannery towns of Harlingen and Brownsville, we were able to discuss with the workers the nature and the role of the Communist Party as the vanguard party of the working class and a leader in the struggle against national oppression. Since some of our listeners were familiar with the role of the communists on the Mexican side, they were eager to form a party organization on their side. A valley-wide party group was created, centered and meeting regularly in Harlingen. Talk of the organization of field workers spread quickly along the length of the valley. With the coming of grapefruit picking, committees of pickers came to us to help formulate demands for increased picking rates. With the help of local comrades, we were able to formulate a list of demands as asked for and approved by the workers in the mass meetings held. Despite the fact that the Chicano people had already recognized their right to self-determination and made a call for independence in 1915, and now Chicano proletarians were taking up this call, the CPUSA denied the existence of a Chicano nation. Instead, it took up a struggle for democratic rights of the Mexican national minority. This chauvinist stance came on the eve of the U.S. entrance into World War II and set the stage for the later liquidation of the Afro-American national question. End quote. El plan de Aztlán. El plan espiritual de Aztlán. In the spirit of the new people that is conscious not only of its proud historical heritage but also the brutal gringo, quote-unquote, invasion of our territories, we, the Chicano inhabitants and civilizers of the northern land of Aztlán, from whence came our forefathers, reclaiming the land of their birth and consecrating the determination of our people of the sun, declare that the call of our blood is power, our responsibility, and our inevitable destiny. We are free and sovereign to determine those tasks which are justly called for by our house, our land, our sweat of our brows, and our hearts. Aztlán belongs to those who plant the seeds, water the fields, and gather the crops, and not to the foreign Europeans. We do not recognize the capricious frontiers on the continent. Brotherhood unites us, and love for our brothers makes us a people whose times has come and to struggle against the foreigner gabacho, quote-unquote, who exploits our riches and destroys our culture. With our heart in our hands and our hands in the soil, we declare the independence of our mestizo nation. We are a bronze people with a bronze culture. Before the world, before all of North America, before our brothers in the bronze continent, we are a nation. We are a union of free pueblos. We are Aztlán. Por la raza todo, fuera de la raza nada. Program. El plan espiritual de Aztlán sets the same theme that the Chicanos, la raza de bronce, must use their nationalism as a key common denominator for mass mobilization and organization. Once we're committed to the idea and philosophy of El Plan de Aztlán, we can conclude that the social, economic, cultural, and political independence is the only road to the liberation from oppression, exploitation, and racism. Our struggle, then, must be the control of the barrios, campos, pueblos, lands, our economy, our culture, and our political life. El Plan commits all levels of Chicano society, the barrio, the campo, the ranchero, the writer, the teacher, the worker, the professional, to la causa. Nationalism. Nationalism as a key organization transcends all religious, political, class, and economic factions, or boundaries. Nationalism is the common denominator that all members of la raza can agree on. Organization. 1. Unity. In thinking of our people concerning the barrios, the pueblo, the campo, the land, the poor, the middle class, the professional, all committed to the liberation of la raza. 2. Economy. Economic control of our lives and our communities can only come about to driving the exploiter out of our communities, our pueblos, and our lands, and by controlling and developing our own talents, sweat, and resources. Cultural background and values which ignore materialism and embrace humanism will contribute to the act of cooperative buying and the distribution of resources and production to sustain an economic base for healthy growth and development. Lands rightfully ours will be fought for and defended. Land and realty ownership will be acquired by the community for the people's welfare. Economic ties of responsibility must be secured by nationalism and the Chicano defense units. 3. Education. Must be relative to our people, i.e., history, culture, bilingual education, contributions, etc. Community control of our schools, our teachers, our administrators, our counselors, and our programs. 4. Institutions. Shall serve our people by providing the service necessary for a full life and their welfare on the basis of restitution, not handouts or beggars' crumbs. Restitution for the past economic slavery, political exploitation, ethnic and cultural psychological destruction, and denial of civil and human rights. Institutions in our community which do not serve the people have no place in the community. The institutions belonging to the people. 5. Self-defense. The community must rely on the combined strength of the people. The front line of defense will come from the barrios, the campos, the pueblos, and the ranchitos. Their involvement as protectors of their people will be given respect and dignity. They, in turn, offer their responsibility and their lives for their people. Those who place themselves in the front of the ranks of the people do so out of love and carnalismo. These institutions, which are fattened by our brothers to provide employment and political pork barrels for the gringo, will do so only to act as acts of liberation and for la causa. For the very young, there will no longer be acts of juvenile delinquency, but revolutionary acts. 6. Cultural. Values of our people strengthen our identity and the moral backbone of the movement. Our culture unites and educates the family of La Raza toward liberation with one heart and mind. We must ensure that our writers, poets, musicians, and artists produce literature and art that is appealing to our people and relates to our revolutionary culture. Our cultural values of life, family, and home will serve as a powerful weapon to defeat the gringo dollar value system and encourage the process of love brotherhood. 7. Political representation can only come through independent action on our part, since the two-party system is the same animal with two heads that feed the same that feed from the same trough. Where we are the majority, we will control. Where we are the minority, we will present a pressure group. Nationally, we will represent one party, La Familia de la Raza. Action. 1. Awareness and distribution of El Plan Espiritual de la Aztlán, presented at every meeting, demonstration, confrontation, courthouse, institution, administration, church, school, tree, building, car, and every place of human existence. 2. September 16, on the birthday of Mexican independence, a national walkout by all Chicanos of all colleges and schools to be sustained until the complete revision of the educational system, its policymakers, administration, its curriculum, and its personnel to meet the needs of our community. 3. Self-defense against the occupying forces of the oppressors at every school, every available man, woman, and child. 4. Community nationalization and organization of all Chicanos, El Plan Espiritual de Aztlán. 5. Economic program to drive the exploiter out of our community and wielding together our people's combined resources to control their own production through cooperative effort. 6. Creation of an independent local, regional, and national political party, a nation autonomous and free, culturally, socially, economically, and politically, will make its own decisions on the usage of our lands, the taxation of our goods, the utilization of our bodies of water, the determination of justice, reward and punishment, and the profit of our sweat. El Plan de Aztlán is a plan of liberation. Raza Unida, Preamble and Principles Preamble. La Raza Unida Party proclaims the people of La Raza to be a nation within a nation, endowed with the right and obligation to struggle for self-determination. For over a century in the United States, La Raza has been the victim of political and economic exploitation and oppression. One of the tools that the oppression being the two-party political system, the Democratic and Republican parties. We recognize the two-party system as being a sham democracy, serving only the needs of our exploiters and oppressors. Our party refuses to recognize the state and national electoral process as an effective means of liberation. Our primary emphasis will be the focus on the local level, on those issues which affect La Raza and which are ignored by the traditional political parties. La Raza Unida Party recognizes that all needs of La Raza, and in fact the majority of the American people, can never be met within the present political economic structure of the United States. All our daily action is geared toward taking from the rich and powerful that wealth and power which justly belongs to the poor and working people in order to create a new society which ends the exploitation of man by man. Principles. 1. Self-determination of La Raza. We, the people of La Raza, have the right to control these institutions which affect our lives. By la raza, we mean people from or descendants of people from Mexico, Central America, South America, the Antilles, and those individuals who identify culturally with la raza. 2. Our relationship to other oppressed peoples. La Raza Unida Party supports the struggle for self-determination of all oppressed peoples. We will participate in coalitions on the basis of principle when it is in the interest of all parties involved. La Raza Unida Party does not work within other political parties or endorse other political parties or other candidates. 3. Sexism. La Raza Unida Party is opposed to the domination of one sex by another. The Partido recognizes no distinction between men and women in the common struggle for self-determination. Both women and men of La Raza must provide leadership. 4. Labor. La Raza Unida Party will struggle for full employment and the end of exploitation of all working people. The working people must struggle and organize on every front for the complete industrial democracy. 5. Health. Medical care is a basic right of all people. La Raza Unida Party will fight for free medical care for all people. This includes preventative medicines, industrial safety, and community control of all medical facilities. 6. Housing. Decent housing is a basic human right which should be denied to no one. Overtaxation, racial exclusion, discriminatory denial of funds by credit institutions must be attacked by La Raza Unida Party. 7. Education. All education should be free with open admissions, bilingual, bicultural. Education is the right of La Raza. We must fight for alternative education based on cooperation, not competition, sharing, not selfishness, and above all, a love for all humanity. 8. Penal and legal system. La Raza Unida Party does not recognize the legitimacy of the Anglo-American system of laws and punishment. We seek a system of laws determined and defined by the working people. We will work to abolish the present penal system which confines and brutalizes the victim of an exploitive society. Prisons and jails should be converted into schools and hospitals. The entire concept of prison as a punishment should be abolished and replaced with the concept of true rehabilitation, education, and health. 9. The land. While we support the right of the campesinos to organize to attain their basic rights, and while we oppose all of those who exploit their labor, La Raza Unida Party believes that the land must belong collectively to those campesinos who work it. 10. Imperialism. We call for an immediate end to the United States imperialism and colonialism as epitomized by the United States' presence in Indochina and Puerto Rico. We demand the independence of Vietnam and all Asian, African, and Latin American countries. Victimized by imperialism, we recognize a particular solidarity with the liberation struggles of the Latin American peoples. Alright, and that is the end of the text right there. So what you just saw at the end, starting in the annexes or appendixes, was pretty much just the ATM including historical documents which were kind of calls to action important to the Chicano movement of the era. Starting of course with the Plan de San Diego de Texas of 1915. Yeah, you can definitely tell by the language that it was written around the turn of the century. And then yeah, we have a Communist Party document, some somewhat lost media up there, and we got what's it called, El Plan de Aztlán, el famoso Plan de Aztlán, which you can kind of see there's a lot left out on the emphasis. It's very nationalistic, a lot left out on emphasis of economic questions, especially on emphasis with solidarity. And then you get to the most advanced, which is La Raza Unida Party, which you can definitely tell that was a progressive organization. Now to kind of reiterate and kind of re-examine the position of the August 29 movement, their position in general was for the development of a multinational communist party, which they later attempted with the League of Revolutionary Struggle. And yeah, um, their position on the Chicano movement in general was that communists should be active in organizations like Mechas and the Raza Unida Party and stuff like that. They should get involved in those organizations to steer them and their influence on the national movement towards more revolutionary aims. Now, this was written in the 1970s. I guess it wasn't in 74. It was probably closer to 76, 77. And the Chicano movement wasn't anything like it is nowadays, which I don't know, it's hard to even recognize it nowadays, whether it's like all that active as it was back then. You still find remnants of it. Mecha is still an organization. Raza Unida is kind of dragging along or whatever. It's not the same vehicle for change that it was back in the 70s and late 60s. So yeah, unfortunately, instead of going forward, it's been kind of sidetracked. COINTELPRO did its damage, and we lost a whole generation of potential revolutionary construction to like the gang and street culture and just the general drug epidemics and stuff like that of the 80s and 90s, leaving a lot of us without like mentors coming up into this, or very little. A lot of people don't know how to organize nowadays, and yeah, it's a very grueling task to kind of recover, to kind of rebuild and stuff like that. No way in hell we're gonna be going back to what we had back then, because yeah, that's just not the material condition. That's just not how history works. There is no going backwards. You can only go forward, and with that in mind, that's why it's important to be aware of texts like this and really just study it, take what you can from it, because this is what was left for us by the last revolutionary generation. So the August 29th movement ended up becoming part of the League of Revolutionary Struggle in the very late 70s, organization which was active in the Bay Area as well as Los Angeles, I believe, and other cities, other places in the Southwest and generally in the U.S. Eventually, internal conflict and just contradictions in general would lead to the decline of that organization, as well as the general decline of the communist movement in the late 80s and 90s and stuff like that. Would end up splitting the League of Revolutionary Struggle apart, and some people that were involved in that, some of the more rightist opportunist factions, ended up in the present revisionist organization, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which anybody watching the video, seeing the title of this booklet, will probably be able to find it online. FRSO kind of what's it called? They kind of like resurrected it, but a lot more Aslan based as their attempt of kind of making up for lost time, instead of actually, I don't know, I don't really look into their publications, but it seems like instead of actually studying and reevaluating it, seeing its relevance, they kind of winged it, like, yeah. But yeah, with all of that in mind, I can say for myself and for others like me, the Aslan theory isn't as popular among the Latin American youth and the, progressive circles as it used to be, especially with kind of like the increased momentum and the indigenous movements, land back and all of that. And, with the Black Liberation movement too, Chicano and Latin American ideology, especially discussions over terms like La Raza, have come under a pretty detailed examination, and a lot of that's being like dropped out of respect and kind of consciousness for some of the more controversial roots of it, with Vasconcelos, who was pretty much a Mexican fascist. As for a multinational party, well, like I said before, Raza Unida isn't much of a thing no more, as much as it tries to remain like a surviving organization. Mecha isn't the same vehicle it used to be, and the Chicano movement in general is a lot harder to spot these days. So yeah, it doesn't look like a multinational organizing for a communist organization. I mean, in my attempt, a lot of those organizations fill up really quick with white people. So yeah, it might be up to us to kind of just focus on our communities, kind of rebuild that, start doing mass organization projects among Latin American immigrant and Chicano peoples, kind of reintegrate like the whole socialist and collective cultures among the people, and go from there. Eventually we will probably be able to have a multinational communist organization, but living where I live in the working class cities and towns of the Bay Area, I have seen a particularly lot of neglect from a lot of the progressive activist scenes and stuff that's around here towards the Latino communities out here. A lot of them get carried away in symbolism and discourse and this or that, and people in the Latino communities have absolutely no idea, especially the working class people have absolutely no idea that these organizations exist. They're absolutely not relevant. So yeah, they're not going to be making absolutely any sway on these people if the basic foundation isn't there. And where the progressive organizations don't exist for the Latino community, that void is being filled by reformists, by nonprofits, by the church, which some of them do very important work, but obviously and for obvious reasons, they're never going to direct the masses towards the overthrow of capitalism, imperialism, fascism, all of that. They're never going to inspire militancy among the workers, and we'll never have a complete liberation under their wing. It's going to be continuously integrationist, and the people are going to be misguided to see victories as little reforms, little bills passed, crumbs handed down to kind of shut us the fuck up and have us celebrating some just really dumb stuff, like having more Latinos in office, or seeing people turn into business owners, whatever have you. But yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this text. I really enjoyed this text. Having grown up with my more recent exposure to the Chicano movement and all that was built at that time, sounding a lot like El Plan de Aztlán at the end right there, very metaphysical, very pseudo-spiritual, and in general just, I don't know how to say it, just kind of like culturally chauvinist and like the petty bourgeois orientation, like was said earlier in the text. It was very refreshing to see this through a dialectical and materialist lens, through a lens of communism, Marxism and stuff like that, and really see it broken down, analyzed, kind of have things put into perspective. Why is this or that progressive? Where is this or that imperfect? Which they kind of could have done a better job at talking about that, but I could kind of see the purpose. You can't exactly focus on that. This is supposed to be like a motivating text to kind of rile people up into the Chicano movement and towards the building of socialism, towards the struggle of the working class. So over focusing on negative aspects isn't always the best to do that. There is struggle sessions and criticism for that, and self-criticism, that too. But yeah, that'll all be worked out depending on what everybody does with this text and how we put it to good use. Anyways, I hope you guys are having a good day out there. Thank you for listening in. And yeah, once again, this is your friend Mosey, tuning out. Peace.